The first thing Vanessa Carter registered was the sharp scent of antiseptic. It lingered in the air, sterile and cold, pressing against her senses. When her eyes fluttered open, the ceiling above her swam into focus, harsh fluorescent lights, a dull white expanse broken only by the shadow of a metal arm holding a saline drip. She tried to move, but her head throbbed as if someone had struck her with a hammer. A figure leaned over her bed, his white coat rustling softly. "Can you tell me your name?" The man's voice was calm, professional, yet touched with concern. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Panic rose in her chest as she realized she couldn't find the words. Not because her throat was dry, but because there was nothing to say. She had no name, no memory. Her tongue felt glued to the roof of her mouth, her mind an empty slate. The doctor's eyes narrowed. "You've suffered a head injury," he explained slowly, as though she might not grasp the words. "And hypothermia. Temporary amnesia isn't unusual in cases like this. You're safe now, but it may take time for your memory to return." He waited, but Vanessa remained silent, staring at him as if he were speaking in code. After a moment, he scribbled something on his clipboard and stepped away, murmuring to the nurses clustered near the door. She caught fragments. Concussion, hypothermia, observation. They glanced at her, their expressions tight, pitying. When the room finally quieted, she closed her eyes, but the silence wasn't comforting. Darkness pressed in, and in that darkness came the echo of water, cold, endless water lapping at her skin. She shivered and clutched the thin blanket around her, but the sensation lingered, bone deep. The next morning, a group of doctors made their rounds. The tall one with glasses stopped at her bed. "Still no memory?" he asked. She shook her head. Her body felt intact, no broken bones, no obvious wounds, but her mind was fractured. Later, visitors trickled in for the other patients. An elderly woman across the ward received a boy of about 15, lanky and restless. He kept stealing glances at Vanessa, curiosity plain on his face. Finally, he drifted closer, clutching a soda can in one hand. "Is it true?" he asked in a hushed voice. "You don't remember who you are?" She turned her gaze to him, the motion automatic, her expression blank. Then she gave a slow shake of the head. "Wow." He sounded almost awed. "But, have they tried searching online?" "Everyone's online. You've got to be somewhere." She frowned, uncertain. He grinned, lifting his phone. "Want me to help? We can do a reverse image search. If I take your picture and upload it, maybe your social media pops up." Before she could protest, if she even knew how, he snapped a photo. His fingers flew across the screen, tapping, swiping, scanning. Minutes stretched as she watched his concentration deepen. Then, suddenly, his face lit up. "Found you!" he exclaimed, his voice carrying across the room. A nurse shushed him, but he didn't care. He turned the phone so she could see. On the screen was a profile picture. A woman stared back, her own face, familiar yet foreign. Below it, a name, Vanessa Carter. Her breath caught. "Vanessa." The syllables stirred something faint, a vibration deep inside. The boy leaned in. "See? That's you. You're Vanessa Carter. Told you it'd work." She touched the screen as if it might dissolve under her fingers. "Vanessa Carter." The words felt heavy, both anchor and chain. They gave her shape, but they didn't unlock the door. She still didn't know where she lived, who she loved, or why she had woken up in a hospital bed half drowned and half dead. That night, when the ward quieted, Vanessa drifted into uneasy sleep. Dreams rose quickly, fractured and raw. She was standing in icy water, waves slapping against her skin, pulling her down into black depths. Somewhere nearby came the sound of voices, shouts, desperate and sharp. Then a hand, strong and violent, struck her head, and everything blurred into darkness. She jolted awake, gasping, her gown clinging to sweat-damp skin. The room was silent, the other patients breathing steadily in their beds. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, the echo of pain still fresh. The dream felt too vivid to be illusion. It was memory, jagged and incomplete, but real. Vanessa lay back, staring at the ceiling, her mind swirling with fragments. Cold water, shouting, a blow to the head. She had a name now, but names weren't enough. Somewhere, buried beneath the fog, the truth waited. And the truth would not stay hidden forever. 3 days after she first opened her eyes, the doctors at Harborview finally agreed she was stable enough to leave. Vanessa Carter sat on the edge of her hospital bed, a stack of papers in her lap, referrals to a neurologist, an appointment schedule for a therapist, instructions written in clipped medical shorthand she barely understood. The discharge nurse went over every page with a patient smile, but the words felt distant, like muffled echoes behind glass. All Vanessa could truly register was that they were letting her walk out of this building and into a world she no longer recognized. Her clothes had been returned in a plastic bag, jeans stiff with dried salt, a sweatshirt still smelling faintly of the sea. She slipped into them anyway, shivering at the memory her body carried even if her mind did not. Outside, the Seattle sky was heavy with gray, clouds sagging low over the skyline. The air was damp, misting against her cheeks as she slid into the back of a cab. The driver asked for an address. She hesitated, pulse quickening, then fumbled in the envelope given by the hospital. Inside was a slip of paper with an address scribbled by the police, found through the online search. Capitol Hill, 2nd floor. The cab carried her through streets glistening with last night's rain. Rows of townhouses and brick apartments blurred past. At last, they stopped in front of a modest building tucked between two cafes, its paint a little weather-worn, ivy creeping up one wall. She climbed the stairs slowly, key trembling in her hand. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and something inside her chest tightened. Without thinking, she stepped into the narrow hallway, turned left, and found the kitchen. Her feet had remembered what her mind could not. The chipped ceramic mug waiting in the cabinet, the smell of coffee grounds in the jar, the humming refrigerator. It was all familiar and yet not. She poured herself a glass of water, testing the taps as if muscle memory guided her. Cold on the right, hot on the left. Correct. She carried the glass to the window overlooking the street and stood there for a long moment, listening to the muffled rumble of a passing bus. The bedroom told more stories. Clothes hung neatly in the closet, all her size. The suitcase at the corner of the room was half-packed, as though she had either just arrived or had been preparing to leave in a hurry. On the nightstand, she found an album thick with photographs. She carried it to the couch, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. There she was, smiling with her parents at a Christmas tree, hiking with friends in the Cascades, posing with classmates in high school. But one face appeared again and again beside hers, a dark-haired woman with sharp eyes and a grin that radiated determination. The name surfaced with startling clarity, Rachel Stein. The memory made her shiver. She didn't know why, but she felt that Rachel mattered. She was still holding the album when the phone rang. The sound jarred her. She nearly dropped the book. She searched the living room until she found the cordless handset buried under a stack of unopened mail. "Vanessa!" a voice asked urgently, female, breathless. "Oh, thank God. Where have you been?" "I've been calling for days, texting, nothing. Do you have any idea how worried I was?" Vanessa pressed the receiver tighter to her ear. The voice was familiar, yet slippery, like a tune half remembered. "It's Kelly. Kelly Parker," the woman continued. "We worked together. Don't tell me you forgot me too." Vanessa swallowed hard, unable to form the right words. Kelly barreled on. "Listen, I don't know what happened, but you dropped off the face of the earth last Friday. Nobody's seen you." And then her voice broke. "Vanessa, you didn't even tell me you got fired. I had to hear it from HR." The word stung. Fired. Images flickered across Vanessa's mind. An office, harsh fluorescent lights, the taste of cheap coffee, the heavy silence when a manager closed the door behind her. She rubbed her temples, but the memory dissolved before she could grasp it. Kelly's voice softened. I know you're probably embarrassed, but you could have told me. Losing a job isn't the end of the world. You just disappeared, and then your phone went dead. I thought. She stopped herself, then asked in a whisper, Are you okay? Vanessa closed her eyes. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Was she okay? She was alive, yes. She had a name now, a place to call home. But her mind was fractured, her past a shattered mirror. And the nagging image of Rachel Stein kept surfacing, as if tugging her toward a truth she wasn't ready to face. I don't know, she whispered. There was silence on the line. Then Kelly said firmly, I'm coming over tomorrow. You shouldn't be alone right now. The line clicked dead. Vanessa set the phone down, her heart racing. She looked around the apartment, at the packed suitcase, at the photographs, at the empty spaces memory should have filled. Somewhere in this place lay answers. But somewhere beyond it lurked the reason she had ended up broken and adrift in the cold waters of Puget Sound. And that reason, she suspected, was only beginning to show itself. The next day, Kelly Parker kept her word. She arrived with a paper bag of takeout and the kind of energy only worry could sustain. She'd barely set the bag on the counter before turning to Vanessa. You still don't remember everything, do you? Kelly asked, searching her face. Vanessa shook her head slowly. The night had been another battle, dreams of icy waves and a woman's voice calling from the dark. She hadn't slept more than a few hours. Kelly sighed, pulling out 2 containers of soup. I don't know if this will help, but maybe we should talk about Mark. The name landed like a stone. Vanessa stiffened. Mark Davis, Kelly pressed gently. Your boyfriend. Or maybe not anymore. You were staying at his place after you moved out of here for a while. He said things were rocky. And after you lost your job, the word fired again. Vanessa's pulse quickened. She gripped the edge of the counter as a fragment of memory tore through the haze. She saw Mark's face, contorted with anger, his voice rising in accusation. You're useless without that job, Vanessa. Do you think I'm going to carry you? I didn't sign up to babysit someone who can't keep up. His words struck like slaps, each syllable laced with contempt. Her chest tightened. She remembered the heat in her cheeks, the sting of humiliation. She remembered the suitcase half-packed, dragged to the door while his shouting echoed behind her. Then go, he'd said. If you can't even handle your own life, don't drag me down with you. She gasped, clutching the countertop until her knuckles turned white. Kelly froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Vanessa? I remember. Her voice cracked, but the words carried weight. I left him. I walked out with my things. He didn't want me there anymore. Kelly's eyes softened, pity replacing urgency. He's always been a jerk. You deserved better. But Vanessa barely heard. The image of the suitcase blurred, replaced by the recurring dream. Water surging around her, voices swallowed by the tide. And then Rachel. Always Rachel. Her face flashing through the fog, eyes sharp, voice insistent. That night, the dream returned. Vanessa stood before a warehouse by the sea, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust. Rain hammered the roof, echoing in hollow rhythm. She heard Rachel's voice calling her name, urgent, desperate. A shadow loomed, a sudden blow to the head, then blackness. She woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding against her ribs. By morning, the decision had formed like iron in her chest. She needed to find Rachel Stein. Whatever bound them together, whatever this gnawing instinct meant, she couldn't ignore it. With the address scrawled in her old planner, one of the few things she'd found in her apartment, Vanessa boarded a bus heading north toward the quieter neighborhoods near Green Lake. The ride was long, the sky a curtain of slate gray. Drops of rain streaked the windows, distorting the city into shifting lines. Rachel's house sat on a quiet street lined with fir trees, the kind of modest single-story home where time seemed to slow. Vanessa's hand trembled as she pressed the doorbell. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then footsteps and the door creaked open. A woman in her 60s stood framed in the doorway. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp behind a pair of glasses. She blinked, studying Vanessa with a flicker of recognition. "Can I help you?" "I'm Vanessa Carter," she said carefully as if trying the name again. "I'm a friend of Rachel's." Her voice faltered. "I was hoping to see her." The woman's expression shifted, a shadow passing across her face. She stepped aside, motioning Vanessa in. The living room smelled faintly of old books and chamomile tea. "Rachel hasn't been home in nearly 2 weeks," the woman said finally, lowering herself onto the couch. "She left for the city, something about work, but she didn't come back. She hasn't called. Not once." Vanessa's breath caught. 2 weeks? "Yes. I thought maybe she was just busy, but it isn't like her. I've tried calling, but her phone is always off." The woman's eyes glistened. "Do you know anything?" Vanessa shook her head, throat tight. She didn't know, but the dreams, the fragments, the gnawing certainty in her gut told her Rachel's disappearance was no coincidence. She sat in silence, the rain tapping against the windows. For the first time since waking in that hospital bed, Vanessa felt a sliver of clarity. Whatever had happened to her, whatever had left her broken and adrift in Puget Sound, Rachel Stein was at the center of it. And if Rachel had vanished, it meant Vanessa's nightmare was only beginning. The rain had tapered off into a fine mist by the time Vanessa reached Rachel's apartment. It was a modest complex tucked behind an espresso bar in Fremont, the kind of building young journalists and artists clung to before the rent doubled. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and old carpet cleaner. Vanessa's heart thudded as she lifted the spare key Rachel's mother had pressed into her palm. The lock turned with a reluctant click. The door creaked open, revealing a space in disarray. Stacks of notebooks and folders covered the small dining table. A laptop sat open, its screen black but still warm to the touch, as if abandoned mid-thought. Dishes lingered in the sink, a half-drained coffee mug perched precariously on the counter. Vanessa stepped carefully inside, every sense sharpened. She eased into the chair at the desk and tapped the space bar. The laptop whirred awake, the screen flooding with light. Rachel's inbox filled the screen, rows of subject lines, curt, demanding. She skimmed through them, her eyes darting over the words. Deadline missed again. We can't keep covering for you. Final warning. Editors from 2 online outlets had filled her inbox with reprimands. Rachel had been drowning under pressure. Vanessa's chest tightened. She could almost hear Rachel's voice arguing with an unseen editor. Fire laced into every word. But buried among the barrage of deadlines was something else. A message dated 2 weeks earlier. Sender, Hannah Miller. The subject line was deceptively plain, meeting tonight. 8 p.m. Will send location. Vanessa clicked it open. A short line of text appeared. It's important. You'll understand when you see it. Don't come alone. Below it, a pinned map marker glowed. A warehouse on the southern edge of Puget Sound, an old boathouse long abandoned after the yacht club folded. The moment she saw the map, her body stiffened. The dream, the rain, the metal roof, the hollow echo of footsteps. She knew this place. Her pulse quickened as she pulled on her coat and headed back into the gray Seattle afternoon. The city seemed to blur around her as she boarded a bus, then another. By the time she stepped off near the shoreline, the mist had thickened into drizzle. The boathouse stood at the edge of the water, its siding weathered to a dull orange. Graffiti scrawled across the lower panels. A rusted staircase wound to the second floor. Vanessa's breath came shallow as she placed her hand on the railing. A shock of recognition coursed through her. She climbed slowly. At the top, a narrow hallway led to a room with blinds half closed against the weak light. She pushed the door open, the hinges whining. The interior smelled of damp wood and rust, the air heavy with forgotten salt. Tables and broken chairs lay scattered, but one corner held sharp clarity. Vanessa's knees weakened as fragments surged back. Rachel was here. Vanessa could see her friend at the table. Photographs spread across the wood grain. Faces pinned to paper. Names scribbled in margins. And at the center, one man, his expression smug even in candid shots. Victor Green. The name surfaced from the fog with brutal force. She remembered Rachel leaning in close, voice urgent. He's not just corrupt. He's dangerous. He has blood on his hands, Vanessa. Vanessa blinked hard, her breath catching. The memory sharpened further. Rachel sliding a folder across the table. Vanessa's hands opening it, eyes widening at invoices, bank statements, reports tying Green to under-the-table pharmaceutical contracts. He had once been a senior procurement officer for Washington's Department of Health, steering millions in state money into companies that paid him in return. Green had power, resources, and no conscience. Rachel had been reckless enough to dig. And somehow, Vanessa had been pulled into the orbit of her investigation. But the memory didn't stop there. It rushed forward to its violent end. The door had burst open. Two men surged inside, shadows against the dying light. Rachel had shouted something. Vanessa couldn't remember what. A heavy fist collided with her skull, white pain exploding like fireworks. She staggered, Rachel's cry echoing in her ears. Then nothing. Vanessa's chest heaved as she gripped the edge of the table in the boathouse. The sound of rain against the roof dragged her back to the present, but the sensation of that blow lingered. She touched the back of her head, half expecting to feel the wound reopen. The room spun. She stumbled back, bracing against the wall, forcing herself to breathe. Rachel had been right here. Hannah Miller too. And then the attack, swift, efficient, meant to silence them. She stared out the window toward the dark water of the Sound, the surface rippling under the drizzle. Somewhere in those waves she had nearly died. And somewhere out there, Rachel and Hannah had vanished into silence. Vanessa knew one thing with aching certainty. She had not stumbled into this nightmare by accident. She had been targeted alongside them. And the name Victor Green was no longer just a memory. It was a threat still alive in the city. That night, sleep came in fragments again. Vanessa drifted in and out of uneasy dreams until one memory surfaced with startling clarity, as if it had been waiting for her to be weak enough to remember. She and Rachel were sitting on the patio of a small cafe in Belltown. Summer sun slanted across the tables, catching in the rims of their coffee cups. Another woman sat with them, Sasha, an old classmate who had drifted back into their orbit. The three of them leaned close over the table, voices low, as though they were plotting something dangerous. Rachel's eyes burned with that familiar determination. She had been talking for nearly 20 minutes, her words spilling fast, full of fire. Look, the system doesn't protect women. You know it, I know it. How many stories have we heard? Women left with nothing, women beaten, women silenced. Those men keep walking away untouched. Why should they? Vanessa remembered laughing nervously, swirling the last sip of her latte. So what, we become vigilantes now? A secret society of avengers? Rachel didn't even blink. Exactly. Think of it, Justice Sisters. A network of women who track these guys, expose them, ruin them if we have to. Online, in court, or whatever it takes. Sasha had frowned, shaking her head. Rachel, that's insane. You can't just punish people on your own. That's not how it works. There are laws. Rachel shot her a withering look. Laws, she echoed. Tell that to the women who filed restraining orders that went nowhere. Tell that to the ones who got cornered at work and fired for speaking up. Don't talk to me about laws, Sasha. I've written too many stories about how broken they are. Vanessa had shifted in her chair, uneasy. She remembered the clatter of dishes from inside the cafe, the smell of roasted beans, the weight of Rachel's conviction pressing down on both of them. "You're talking about ruining lives," she said carefully. "And what happens when someone gets hurt? This doesn't end well." But Rachel had only leaned forward, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become scarier than he is." Sasha had recoiled, muttering that Rachel was out of her mind. She had left early, shaking her head, refusing to be part of any of it. Vanessa stayed, though unease twisted in her gut. She had tried to reason with Rachel. "Even if we wanted to help, we don't have the resources. We're not private investigators. We're not police." Rachel's smile had been grim. "We don't need badges. We have the truth. We find it, we expose it, and we let the world do the rest." Vanessa remembered feeling a chill despite the warmth of the summer air. She had thought Rachel's idea was a phase, a burst of frustration that would pass once a new assignment landed on her desk. But looking into her friend's eyes, she saw something unyielding. Rachel wasn't imagining. She was planning. The memory dissolved, and Vanessa jolted awake in her bed, her skin clammy with sweat. She lay staring at the ceiling of her Capitol Hill apartment, heart hammering. Now it made sense. The late nights, the hushed phone calls, the stack of incriminating files she had glimpsed in Rachel's apartment. The Justice Sisters had never been a hypothetical conversation. Rachel had made it real, and Hannah Miller, the name from the email, must have been part of it. Vanessa sat up, pulling the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Every instinct told her that Rachel's disappearance, Hannah's silence, and her own near drowning were threads in the same tangled web. Victor Green had been exposed, humiliated, ruined. If Rachel had targeted him through her so-called network, then he had every motive to strike back. Vanessa rubbed her temples, trying to push away the throbbing ache that returned whenever she remembered too much at once. But this time, she didn't want the memory to fade. This time she clung to it, because now she understood. Rachel hadn't just been chasing another story. She had been leading a crusade, one that painted a target on her back, and somehow on Vanessa's too. And until she found Rachel, the nightmare that had begun in the icy waters of Puget Sound would not end. The days blurred into gray drizzle and sleepless nights. Vanessa combed through Rachel's apartment again, determined not to miss anything. That was when she found the folder shoved between two stacks of newspapers. It wasn't marked, but the contents told their own story. Printouts of blog posts, police reports half redacted, screenshots from social media threads, and in the center, a photograph of Hannah Miller. Vanessa stared at the image, a young woman with long auburn hair, her smile hesitant, eyes tired. She looked ordinary enough to vanish in a city that swallowed people whole. Yet the notes scrawled in Rachel's sharp handwriting painted a darker truth. Hannah hadn't just been a friend. She had been a victim. The story unraveled piece by piece. 2 years ago, Hannah had been engaged to a man nearly 20 years older, Victor Green, a senior procurement officer at the Washington State Department of Health. Green had built his career on contracts worth millions, vaccines, medical supplies, all tied to companies eager to secure government approval. On paper, he was respected. In reality, he was a parasite. Vanessa traced the notes with her finger. Green had controlled every corner of Hannah's life. The financial manipulation, the emotional degradation, the subtle threats, it was all there. And when she finally tried to leave, he hadn't let her go quietly. There were whispers of intimidation, even an accident on the highway that left her hospitalized for weeks. Her stomach knotted. She remembered Rachel's words, sharp as broken glass. He's not just corrupt. He's dangerous. The folder held more. Clippings from business journals describing Green's fall from grace. An exposé hinted at by unnamed sources, fueled by leaked photographs of him with women, who weren't his wife. And then a final note sent to father-in-law. Confirmed. Vanessa's breath caught. Rachel had done this. She had gathered the evidence, the photographs, the timelines, and delivered them straight to the one man who could end Green's career, his wealthy father-in-law. The scandal had detonated like a bomb. Green's marriage collapsed. The divorce finalized in record time. He lost his post at the department, his name dragged through local media. And he knew exactly who had pulled the trigger. Vanessa sat back in Rachel's chair, the apartment silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She could almost see it. Rachel, triumphant, believing she'd struck a blow for justice. Hannah, free at last. A survivor stepping out from under Green's shadow. But Green wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat. Vanessa rubbed her temples, her mind spinning. The timeline aligned too neatly. Rachel's stories about Justice Sisters. Hannah's email setting up a secret meeting at the boathouse. And her own body dragged from the freezing waters of Puget Sound. This wasn't random. Green was behind it. The thought chilled her more than the memory of icy waves. Green had resources, contacts in business and politics, even in law enforcement. Men like him didn't fade. Quietly, they regrouped, they lashed out. And if Rachel had humiliated him in front of his entire network, he had every reason to retaliate. Vanessa rose, pacing the length of the apartment. The rain outside streaked down the windows in endless rivers. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, her reflection fractured in the pain. She remembered the attack in the boathouse, the two men bursting in, the blow to her skull. They hadn't been random thugs. They had been sent. Green had wanted her silenced as much as Rachel. Her throat tightened. Hannah, too, the young woman who had once been his fiancée, the proof of his cruelty, the reason his carefully built empire had crumbled. Vanessa closed the folder and hugged it to her chest, as though it might steady her pounding heart. She didn't want to believe one man could hold so much power over their lives. But every trail she followed circled back to him. Victor Green wasn't just a name in her fractured memory anymore. He was a shadow looming over every step she took. And if Rachel and Hannah were still alive, he was the one keeping them hidden. The deeper Vanessa dug, the more inevitable the next step felt. Green had torn through the lives of every woman who crossed him, and yet there was one thread Rachel's notes hadn't fully unraveled. His ex-wife, Margaret. Late one evening, hunched over Rachel's laptop, Vanessa found her. Margaret Green had reverted to her maiden name, Wallace, after the divorce. She lived quietly in a townhouse outside Bellevue with her daughter Julia, 9 years old. Her social media page was modest, filled with photos of Julia feeding ducks at Green Lake, drawings taped to the fridge, snapshots of school plays. The domestic normalcy made Vanessa's chest ache. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she whispered to herself, if Green could lose everything, because of them, maybe he can lose more. The thought frightened her, but it stayed. 2 days later, she stood on Margaret's porch, rehearsing the lies she had cobbled together. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 30s. Blonde hair pulled back, weariness etched into her features. Hi, Vanessa began, her voice unsteady. I saw your post about looking for after-school help. Someone to pick Julia up. Stay with her until you're home. Margaret tilted her head, suspicion flickering across her eyes. But then Julia appeared at her side, holding a stuffed rabbit. Mom, who is it? Margaret's features softened. She stepped aside. Come in. The house smelled of cinnamon and laundry detergent. Vanessa followed Margaret into the kitchen, where toys and textbooks were scattered across the table. Julia darted to the living room, humming to herself. Margaret gestured to a chair. You've worked with kids before. Vanessa's throat tightened. She had intended to carry the lie further, to play the part of a would-be nanny. But the weight of what she was about to ask pressed too heavy. She folded her hands and forced herself to speak. No, that's not why I'm here. Margaret froze, her eyes narrowing. Then why are you standing in my kitchen? Vanessa exhaled shakily. Because I know what kind of man your ex-husband is, and I think he's behind something terrible. She told her everything. The attack at the boathouse, the missing women, Rachel's investigation, the folder of evidence. Her words tumbled out, raw and desperate. Margaret's face drained of color. She gripped the edge of the counter as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. You're telling me Victor? Her voice cracked. She tried again. You're saying he hasn't stopped. Vanessa leaned forward, urgent. He never will. Not until someone forces him to. But I need your help to do that. Margaret shook her head violently. No, absolutely not. Julia's all I have. You're asking me to put her in danger. I would never let her be hurt, Vanessa cut in. Her voice broke. But Green doesn't know me. He knows you. If he thinks you and Julia are gone missing, then I can use that. I can make him believe he has something to lose. The room fell into silence. Margaret stared at her, eyes brimming with disbelief, with fear, with something else too, recognition. She knew the monster she had married. She knew he was capable of anything. Finally, she whispered, You want me to disappear? Yes, Vanessa said, her voice hoarse. Just for a few days, long enough to force him out of hiding, long enough to make him talk. Margaret looked toward the living room, where Julia's laughter floated through the air. She closed her eyes, her hands trembling. Then, with a quiet exhale, she nodded. If it means stopping him, I'll do it. Relief crashed through Vanessa, mingled with dread. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. She was dragging a mother and her child into a dangerous game, using them as pawns against a man who already destroyed lives with ease. That night, as she lay awake on her own couch, the rain hammering against the window, Vanessa turned the plan over in her mind again and again. Every instinct screamed that it was wrong, reckless, unforgivable. She wasn't a detective, wasn't a vigilante. She was just a woman clawing at the edges of her broken memory. But Rachel's face haunted her. Hannah's too. If Green had them, time was running out. Vanessa pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the tears. She had gone too far to turn back. Whatever the cost, she would see this through. Vanessa rehearsed the words 100 times before she dialed. Her hands trembled as she gripped the burner phone. The rain tapping against her apartment window like a warning she could no longer ignore. The line clicked, and after 2 rings, a deep, irritated voice answered. Green. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. Victor, I have your ex-wife and your daughter. If you want them back, you'll return Rachel Stein and Hannah Miller. Alive. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Vanessa braced herself for denial, outrage, panic. But instead, Green chuckled. Low, humorless. You don't waste time, he said. His tone was calm, far too calm. So Rachel's friend finally crawls out of the water. The blood drained from her face. He knew. He had always known she survived. And his voice carried none of the confusion of an innocent man. No demand for explanation. No questions about who Rachel and Hannah were. Only recognition. Her gamble had worked. It was confirmation enough. You'll get your wife and daughter back when I see Rachel and Hannah standing in front of me, Vanessa said, making her voice as hard as she could. 8 hours. Tacoma Docks. If you try anything, you'll never see Julia again. Green didn't argue. He didn't bargain. Fine, he said simply and hung up. The dead tone hummed in Vanessa's ear long after. She sat frozen, the phone heavy in her palm, her body trembling with adrenaline and dread. If there had been any doubt left, it was gone. Victor Green had Rachel and Hannah, and now the final move was in motion. She couldn't do this alone. That truth pressed down on her as surely as the rain pressing against the glass. So she went to the only person who might understand, Hannah's father. Captain Miller lived in a weathered house near the docks in West Seattle. A retired sailor, his shoulders still broad beneath his wool sweater, his hands calloused from years at sea. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, rain-soaked and hollow-eyed, he didn't ask questions. "You're Vanessa," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." Her voice cracked. "I need your help. Hannah's alive, but Green has her. And Rachel, too." His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He ushered her inside, poured her a cup of coffee, and listened as she laid everything bare. The Justice Sisters, Rachel's investigation, the evidence against Green, the attack at the boathouse, the call she had just made. When she finished, silence hung heavy between them. Finally, Captain Miller set down his mug. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "And you're right. Green won't stop. Men like him never do." He stood, pulling on his coat. "We'll need the police, but they'll want proof, not guesses." Together, they went to the precinct, where Vanessa repeated her story to a detective. The officer's skepticism was visible, but when Captain Miller spoke, his voice steady, commanding, honed from years giving orders at sea, they listened. The details Vanessa provided, the timeline, the phone call, it was enough to mobilize a response. By the time night fell, a plan was in motion. Tacoma docks sprawled dark and industrial, the smell of salt and oil thick in the air. Floodlights glared across empty shipping containers, casting long shadows. The water lapped against pylons, a slow rhythm beneath the tension. Vanessa stood with Captain Miller at the edge of the cordoned-off pier. Beyond them, unmarked patrol cars idled in silence, their headlights dimmed. Officers waited in the shadows, weapons ready. Every instinct screamed at her to run. She wasn't a cop. She wasn't a fighter. She was just a woman clinging to the shards of her memory, desperate to save her friend. But it was too late to turn back. She wrapped her arms around herself, her breath clouding in the cold night air. Captain Miller rested a heavy hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. "Stay behind me," he said firmly, "no matter what happens." Vanessa nodded, though fear clawed at her throat. From across the docks, the faint rumble of an engine broke the silence. A boat eased toward the pier, its lights dimmed, cutting across the dark water like a predator. This was it, the moment she had feared since waking in that hospital bed. The moment when everything, the lies, the memories, the blood, would come to a head. Vanessa clenched her fists, her eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. Somewhere on that boat, Rachel and Hannah's lives hung in the balance, and the man who had orchestrated everything was finally stepping into the open. The night air at the Tacoma docks was raw, carrying the briny sting of salt water and diesel fuel. Vanessa huddled deeper into her coat, the damp wind cutting to her bones. Around her, the shadows moved with purpose. Seattle PD officers crouched behind stacks of shipping containers, radios clipped to their shoulders, eyes fixed on the water. A few yards away, Captain Miller stood like a stone pillar, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, jaw tight with restrained fury. The rumble of the approaching boat grew louder, vibrating through the wooden planks beneath their feet. Floodlights from the patrol units stayed dark. Silence clung to the pier, broken only by the slap of water against the pylons. Vanessa's breath came shallow, her pulse roaring in her ears. Then the vessel emerged from the darkness. A sleek motorboat, paint dulled, its bow cutting through the black water. It slowed near the pier, but didn't tie off. Instead, two figures appeared at the edge, dragging something, or rather, someone. Vanessa's heart seized. Rachel and Hannah. They were thrown unceremoniously into the water, their bodies splashing against the current before striking the barnacle-crusted edge of the dock. Hannah screamed as she clung to the slick wood. Rachel, battered but alive, fought to pull them both up. Their coughing and cries echoed across the still night. Vanessa's instinct screamed at her to run forward, to grab them, but Captain Miller's arm shot out, barring her path. His voice was low, steady. "Wait," because the trap was already springing shut. From every direction, Flashlights flared to life. Officers surged forward, weapons drawn, their shouts ringing through the night. Seattle PD, hands in the air. The men on the boat froze, caught in the harsh beams of light. One tried to reach for his waistband, but a warning shot cracked across the water, halting him cold. Within seconds, officers were swarming the vessel, forcing the men to their knees. And there he was, Victor Green. He stood near the helm, his tailored coat dripping with mist, his face carved into a mask of contempt. Even cornered, even with a dozen rifles aimed at him, his arrogance radiated. His eyes swept the pier until they landed on Vanessa. A thin, venomous smile curved his lips. "So it's you," he said, his voice carrying over the water. "The drowning girl who didn't stay drowned." Vanessa's stomach twisted, but she met his gaze. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't trembling. Officers yanked Green's arms behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs ringing sharp against the roar of the tide. He didn't resist. He only stared at her, as though memorizing her face, as though promising that this wasn't finished. But it was. Captain Miller rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Rachel and Hannah. He pulled Hannah into his arms, his weathered face breaking with relief as she clung to him, sobbing. Rachel coughed violently, salt water spilling down her chin, before lifting her gaze to Vanessa. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, everything else fell away. "You're alive," Rachel rasped, her voice hoarse. "So are you," Vanessa whispered back. Later, after the chaos dimmed and Green's men were loaded into squad cars, they gathered in the corner of the dock, wrapped in emergency blankets. Rachel's face was pale, her body trembling with exhaustion. But the fire in her eyes had not dimmed. She reached for Vanessa's hand, gripping it hard. "It was the Justice Sisters," she admitted, voice low but steady. "Green found out. He knew I was the one who exposed him. Hannah was the proof he couldn't bury. That's why he came after us." Vanessa swallowed, the words confirming what she had already pieced together. He wanted to erase all of it, all of you. Rachel's eyes flicked to Captain Miller, then back. "We were reckless. I thought we could control it. I thought revenge would feel like justice, but it only painted a target on our backs." The weight of her words settled between them. Vanessa felt the chill seep deeper, not from the night air, but from the truth. Green's empire of lies had crumbled, his arrogance broken under the spotlight of law and consequence. The Justice Sisters had drawn blood, but the price had nearly been their lives. As dawn threatened the horizon, streaks of pale gray cutting through the night, Vanessa stood at the edge of the dock. The tide whispered below, dark and endless, carrying away the remnants of a battle she hadn't asked for but could never escape. The truth was clear now. Green's threat was finished. The women had survived. But survival came with its own cost, etched into scars that would never fully fade. For the first time since waking in that hospital bed, Vanessa felt something like finality. The nightmare had reached its peak, and at last it was over. The city was quiet when they returned. A pale drizzle clung to the streets, washing Tacoma salt and oil from their clothes, but not the memories. Police had finished their statements. The dock was empty and Green was behind bars. Yet, as Vanessa, Rachel, and Hannah stepped back into Seattle, the night still carried the echo of sirens. They gathered in Vanessa's apartment, the only place that felt safe enough. The lamps cast a warm glow against the rain-streaked windows, a fragile barrier against the darkness outside. Vanessa set water to boil on the stove, her hands moving automatically. The scent of chamomile filled the air. Rachel sat hunched on the couch, her blanket draped like armor. Hannah curled in an armchair, legs pulled to her chest, eyes staring somewhere far away. Their bodies were here, but part of them was still on the dock, still tasting salt water, still hearing the snap of handcuffs around Green's wrists. When Vanessa set the cups down, steam rising from the porcelain, no one spoke at first. The clink of ceramic against the table was the only sound. Finally, Rachel lifted her head. Her voice was raw but steady. "We should have known. I should have known." She gave a bitter laugh that broke into a cough. "Justice Sisters. What a name. I thought we could fight back, give women power the system denied them. And maybe, for a moment, we did." Green lost his job, his reputation. But in the end, revenge didn't give us peace. It nearly killed us. Hannah nodded faintly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I thought if he suffered like I did, I'd feel free. But tonight, all I felt was fear." Vanessa held her cup tightly, the heat pressing into her palms. She wanted to tell them they weren't wrong. The Green deserved every ounce of ruin, that monsters like him only understood force. But the truth weighed heavy. She remembered the water dragging her under, the helplessness of not knowing her own name, the sight of Rachel being dragged onto that dock. They were alive, yes, but not because revenge had saved them, because luck had, because Green had underestimated them just long enough for the police to strike. Rachel leaned back, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "We can't be who we thought we could be. Not Avengers, not vigilantes, just women who survived. That has to be enough." The words settled like ash. Vanessa's gaze drifted to the photograph, still tucked in her wallet, the one she had seen on Margaret Wallace's page. Julia, Green's daughter, feeding swans at Green Lake, her small hand scattering breadcrumbs into the water, her face alight with simple joy. That image clung to her, pure and uncorrupted. Julia wasn't burdened with Green sins, or the scars of betrayal, or the hunger for vengeance. She was a child, untouched by the darkness that had nearly consumed them all. Vanessa realized that was the future worth protecting, not endless cycles of revenge, but the fragile hope embodied in children like Julia. If justice meant anything, it was breaking those cycles, not feeding them. The rain softened outside, a faint patter against the glass. Vanessa sipped her tea, letting the warmth ease the tremor in her chest. "We can't undo what happened," she said quietly, "but we can choose what comes after." Rachel looked at her, eyes tired but clearer than before. Hannah shifted in her chair, unfolding her legs, grounding herself again. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence, breathing in the steam, letting the world outside shrink to nothing but the circle of lamplight around them. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered. They all knew scars remained, scars that wouldn't fade overnight, scars that might never fully fade. But survival itself was a kind of justice, and truth, no matter how painful, had finally been dragged into the light. As the night deepened, Vanessa closed her eyes. She no longer saw waves or fists in the dark. She saw Julia by the lake, her laughter echoing as birds rose from the water in a flurry of wings. And with that image came a fragile peace. Justice, Vanessa realized, was not about revenge. It was about truth. And the truth, once revealed, had the power to end even the darkest of storms.